Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 32.
No. You got this all wrong already. Ben, this is a huge milestone for us because this is episode 100,000.
What?
Woo! Congratulations, everyone. We did it. 100,000 episodes of Bad at Magic. High fives all around. Well, that's if you count by binary, of course.
Oh, right. Got it.
Because
it's a power of two.
It's a power of two, and it's one with 5 zeros after it. Come on.
You gotta get it.
Well, 32 is super important for me as a computer scientist for a whole bunch of reasons. Now, I'm going to try to not nerd out super hard, but I'm going to give you two big ones, okay?
Okay.
Other than the fact this is episode 100,000. The first one is 32 bits is super important for anybody that works on databases or any kind of hardcore data manipulation software, because 32 bits is the standard that you use to store an integer, which is just a whole number, inside of a computer system. And you can do it one of two ways. It's either signed or unsigned, where you take the first bit and either count that as positive or negative, which then gives you a range of negative 2,147,483,648 to positive 2,147,483, whatever, the whole number. If you do it as an unsigned integer, you only get positive numbers, and that goes from 0 to 4,294,967,295. So that sets kind of the upper and lower limits of what can be stored in a standard data variable. If you go over those limits, like you start seeing all these kinds of super big problems. Classic one is the old Pac-Man machines when they first came out only used 8 bits. And so they can only, oh no, I'm sorry, not 8 bits. I don't remember how many bits, but they can only get up to 256 levels. So if you play an original Pac-Man machine and you pump enough quarters into it to get to level 256, the entire machine just starts to break down because you're rolling over into like overflow memory. It's so cool.
I'll have to watch a video. Maybe I can find one and put in the show notes.
I can feel myself nerding out. I'll dial it back a little bit. I've got one more for you, and that is IP version 4, which is the protocols that computers use to talk to each other over the internet or over any network. The addressing scheme uses 32 bits, which is 4 sets of 8 bits, which is 4 sets of numbers between 0 and 255. Yeah. And that's where you see those numbers sometimes like 192.168.0.1. And that's the IP address of the machine.
I love it that at some point in time in the past, some scientists that came up with this thought that would be more than enough numbers forever for the history of forever for the internet.
They did, and it is not. We're already suffering with the restrictions that IP version 4 is causing. And so they've come out and they're starting to implement at high levels IP version 6, which instead of 32 bits for addresses uses 128-bit addresses. So you have that. That's
like an address for every grain of sand on the seashore.
Probably more than that. It gives you 3.4 times 10 to the 38 unique addresses, which is about it's not quite enough for every atom in the universe, but it's getting there.
But not every address is accessible to every application. When they create a new standard like that, they carve it up into pieces and only allow you to use certain pieces, almost like it's the electromagnetic spectrum.
This is absolutely true. But with IP version 6, broken down into 4 sets of 32-bit integers, you can have completely restricted by the first 3 octets and just the last one giving you, over 4 billion unique addresses.
This segment is where the accountant in you meets the computer scientist in you.
Yeah, it's just thinking about allocating every person that is born on this planet their own IP address that they will keep for their entire lives, like a social security number, but better and more practical and useful. It just makes me smile and feel good inside.
Nice. So there's something I need to follow up on from last time. If you remember, I told you last time how perturbed, I think that's not a strong enough word, how incensed I was with the Air Force for making me get a bunch of shots that made me sick and in pain for several days prior to my coming down here in Florida.
Yes, I vaguely remember you being completely like bat poop crazy over how mad you were about it. But yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been here for 3 weeks now. My processing is complete. And guess how many people have looked at my immunizations?
I guarantee you the number is 0.
Yeah, no one's looked at it. No one cares.
But that's irrelevant.
I know.
That's irrelevant.
I know.
Because the base there They sent their requirements out into the world with the assumption and the understanding that anybody that shows up is going to meet all the requirements, so they don't have to double check.
That's giving what happened too much credit. It went well beyond that to the point where the people that were waiting for me here are so disconnected from that process that they aren't even thinking about that at all.
Well, then 6 months from now, when you're done with this job and you're on your way out, I'm going to ask you and see if you take the time to call the deployment manager and be like, hey, let's talk about this line item for my follow-on. Or is it more likely that Ben Rich is going to be like, I had to get the shot. Forget that next guy. He's got to get the shot too.
I like that challenge. I think at some point during my time here, I'll have time to do that. And that's a great example of what I could do to pay it forward, to actually take the time to figure out who edits the line items and see if I can get that taken out. I'll take that as a challenge.
What a perfect misuse of your time, but that's fine. I'm interested to hear that Ben versus
I
bureaucracy.
don't think so. I think you know something about me, and that's that I live by an ethic where I am diametrically opposed to hazing. And I know that this isn't like deliberate hazing, it's almost like accidental hazing, but it's still hazing. And whenever I have an opportunity to be the person who puts an end to hazing, I take it. So this is an opportunity.
So you and I are very much on the same level when it comes to that. Like, as far as when you see injustice, you want to correct it in the world. I think the difference is the level of injustice that triggers our actions and what actions we take. Because it's got to be a little bit higher than that to reach my threshold of actually caring. But when it gets to that threshold, I go whole hog, just burn it all to the ground. Like, everyone is going to suffer until this injustice is rectified. Whereas yours might be a lot lower, but you pull out that pen and that notebook and you're like, boy, howdy, who do I need to call and sit on hold for 2 hours to get this talked about?
Yeah. And I think that's all it'll take. But it'll be a lot easier to solve from this end than it was from the other end. All right.
Well, I'm going to lay money on the table right now, listeners. When we talk about this in 6 months, Ben Rich is going to be beating his head against the desk over how impossible it is to move that immovable object.
Maybe. We'll see. What you just said about thresholds was really interesting because you talked about how something had to rise above a certain level before it stirred your attention. And I want to talk about thresholds for a minute. In fact, I want to introduce what I think will be a new recurring segment on the show. I'm going to call it the long tail.
You've introduced so many recurring segments that we've only done once.
I'll do some research on that. This one we're going to call the long tail. And it's going to take me a minute to introduce the idea of the long tail. But in the future, we'll just say, hey, let's talk long tail. So the long tail, there's kind of a history behind the term, but there's the main source of, there's a book by that name, and there's also an article that was published in Wired magazine in October 2004 by a man by the name of Chris Anderson. The idea of the long tail is that the internet is starting to do something that has democratized the consumption of entertainment or content in a way that's changed the fundamental economics of distributing it to people.
Oh man, this sounds riveting already. Please tell me more.
Well, okay, so in 2004, the internet was just kind of getting its legs and Amazon was just starting to take off. And one of the things that they started to find out is that there was another kind of advertising that was brand new. And that is whenever you get something, it would say, hey, you like this. Maybe you'll also like this other thing that's like it. And that was actually driving people down into the area that was previously considered failed entertainment.
Okay. So kind of like niche products or things that maybe didn't have mass appeal, but that some people would like, but therefore weren't worth like maybe publishing mainstream.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. So if you think of like movies back in the 20th century, every studio's goal for the most part was to have a hit. What does a hit look like? It's a big, bombastic blockbuster that has a big budget, and then it even bigger sells at the box office, and people turn out in droves, and it makes a ton of money.
Okay. Yes.
And part of the reason that it has to follow that model is because the way they make their money is by getting butts in a seat in a theater, or selling you physical copies of a DVD, or having you rent physical copies of, a VHS cassette or a DVD or something like that. And all those things, because of physics, have a limitation on space, and there's economics surrounding that space. The seat in the movie theater, the shelf space in the store where you would buy the DVD or whatever, all of that takes up space, and it costs space to have it there. And so unless something passes beyond a certain threshold of popularity, that space is too expensive and it can't be used. And so it necessarily pushed less popular content out of theaters, out of stores, and made it so that average person couldn't get anything that was short of a blockbuster.
I see. So we're talking about kind of the Disney big movies that ended up in theaters and then trickled out to all the other venues versus their direct to VHS releases.
Exactly.
They know that this thing isn't going to be popular enough to really justify the box office release, but it might take up, some aisle space in Walmart.
Yeah, but there's also kind of a negative connotation associated with those direct to DVD, which meant they were also kind of crappy. I'm talking about stuff that's actually good and just never gets hit. So if you look at like the music industry, it's easier to understand. You might have a popular artist and you have their big hits and their main CDs, but maybe they have a live album or B-sides or foreign release or something like that somebody who's a big fan of that artist would be really interested in, but they can't find in a CD store anywhere because it's expensive to have it take up shelf space in a store.
Okay, which again makes sense.
Same with what you could see on television or over cable TV. Everything's, there's just a limited amount of shelf space, a limited amount of electromagnetic spectrum, a limited amount of hours in the day. So the internet took all of that and almost did away with it. Like the cost of keeping a few electrons on a hard drive on a server somewhere in some server farm is virtually nothing.
Right. Okay. So then by removing the cost of storage or distribution limitation, then that opens up the ability to have just huge catalogs of all this, like not super popular niche type stuff.
Exactly. And it was so successful that it proved that not only was people's appetite for new, interesting, different kinds of content unlimited, but it's actually a bigger market than the hits. So I have a few facts for you from this article.
Well, let's break that down a bit, because what you mean there is that in aggregate, so like there's all these like very niche things that might only get a handful of people that actually like it, but all together, all those tiny niche things combined constitute a much larger portion of the total consumption than the popular stuff.
Exactly. So back in 2004, Amazon was primarily a book retailer. So the statistics in this article compare Amazon with brick and mortar book retailers. So Barnes & Noble, the average Barnes & Noble carries 130,000 titles, and they tend to try to pick those out of popular ones they think will go off the shelves. Now, in 2004, more than half of Amazon's book sales came from outside the top 130,000 titles. So if you made a list of all their top selling titles and went all the way down the list to number 130,000 and cut the list there, they sell more past that point than the top 130,000 combined.
Okay. That's cool. That's a great thing that the internet has given us and we kind of talked about this before. The internet has allowed, you're not a weirdo anymore. Whatever, crazy, off-the-shelf, non-standard thing that you are into, there's a whole community of people out there that are so into it, they are producing content media, and you can go find it.
Yes. So some other great quotes from the article. Quote, "Suddenly popularity no longer has a monopoly on profitability," meaning it's profitable to just make all kinds of content available to people. So this article in 2004 was before YouTube even existed, or I can't remember, maybe it started in 2004, but YouTube was exactly that. It is the long tail. It's whatever anyone wants to put out there on the internet, someone will want to watch it, and that'll keep you looking at YouTube.
Yes. Well, now the flip side of this is the algorithms that allow us, that take us from this big curve and drag us down into the long tail. Because
I don't think the goal is necessarily to get you in the long tail. It's just to make recommendations of other things you might like.
Well, so from their perspective, the company, either Amazon wants you to buy more books or YouTube wants you to stay on YouTube longer. And so that's their motivation. And so they create these algorithms that we figured out that this person likes these kinds of books. Maybe he'll buy more if we feed him more things that people like him like. Or for YouTube, like, oh, these are the videos that he's watching. It lines up with this kind of a demographic. He'll stay on the site longer and therefore consume more advertising, and we'll make more revenue if we feed him videos that maybe he'll like. That's their primary objective, but kind of this almost emergent property or this secondary effect is dragging us down into this long tail.
Yes, but it's not just the algorithm forcing us to do it, it's ourselves. Here's another quote. Most of us want more than just hits. Everyone's taste departs from the mainstream somewhere, and the more we explore alternatives, the more we're drawn to them. So maybe you find out there's something new you like. So now that we've taken all the time to kind of talk about what the long tail is, I want to just delve into one area of my long tail, and maybe next time you can do one, next time we do this segment. So mine, I want to talk about weird sports that Ben watches.
So this was a long explanation to just justify, like, I watch a lot of weird stuff on YouTube, and boy, I want to talk about it.
Yeah, well, next time we'll just say, hey, let's talk about the long tail. Josh, it's your turn. We won't talk about the article and everything. Okay, so I realized another thing that the internet does last time when we talked about spoilers is that it allows for asynchronous concept consumption of things that normally we only consumed in a synchronous fashion. Like if you don't watch the Super Bowl live, somebody's going to spoil it for you and you're going to know who won, and then it doesn't matter that it's on your DVR.
Okay.
But with obscure sports, nobody's going to spoil it for you. So you can watch a recording of it on YouTube like it is live, and it doesn't matter that you're not watching it live. And then they can edit out all the boring parts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so whoever is actually putting it up there for you to consume is just giving you just the good stuff.
Yeah. All right. So here are some. I've got 7 or 8 that I watch. If you go through my YouTube feed, you'll see that I watch people play Magic the Gathering, obviously. Marble racing. I'm big into marble racing. I may or may not own licensed merchandise from marble racing vendors.
Wow. Hardcore. My wife and I just recently watched a handful of the marble racing episodes that John Oliver sponsored.
Yeah, so that's a great example of how the long tail actually brings out content that might otherwise have kind of toiled away in obscurity, and then during the COVID quarantine, it found its day. All sports had been canceled for a few months, and John Oliver is like, you know what the world needs right now? They need some sports. So I'm going to sponsor marble racing. Here you go. And they sponsored Jell's Marble Runs, which is the best marble racing channel on the internet.
Go Rangers. Woo!
Disc golf, another one I've really enjoyed. This is a great example where, like, if you look at like a disc golf pro tour event, maybe the crowd will have somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 100 people. But then the videos within a week have like 1 million views, which means there's people out there that really dig watching disc golf but can't get to one of the events.
Disc golf is funny. I think my wife comes from a very, very small town in Kansas. Like small, like it is 1 square mile. It is 1 mile on a side in a square. And somebody moved in from out of town. I don't know where he was from. And I'm going to get this story wrong. Apologies to everyone in Ashland, Kansas for me talking about this. But apparently some guy moved in from out of town. Everybody called him a hippie. No idea where he's from, but in my mind, he comes from hardcore LA, never wore real shoes, had long hair. That's the vision I see of him. He opened up a pizza store and then started erecting disc golf, like the holes, which is what, just poles with the big chains that dangle down?
Yeah.
And like just put them around like the town in random places, and then had like a flyer at his pizza stand of what the holes were, and it just went like through the town.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the disc golf pro tour events is actually in Kansas.
Oh, is it in Ashland, Kansas? This could be a real thing.
Maybe. That's if you build it, they will come. If I've ever heard of it.
I don't think anybody came though. I think everybody just kind of wondered, what is this weird pole with chains on it doing in this random alleyway?
Yeah. So a few of my other long-tailed sports that I consume on YouTube, bouldering. I love watching just like people climb crazy synthetic rocks. Soapbox racing.
That's still a thing?
Specifically of the Red Bull sponsored variety where it's done with a bit of pomp and flair, and there's jumps and crashes and stuff.
Yeah, like they do their flying machine competition.
Yeah.
Where it's not a competition about actually trying to fly. It's a competition about making the most outlandish thing and falling to your near death.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that, except it's soapbox racing. Japanese game shows. I mean, who does not love a good madcap, crazy Japanese game show?
I mean, yeah, those are hilarious, but I can only take them for like 10 minutes before I start feeling epileptic.
Yeah, I think my favorite one was one where there were a bunch of people, and they coated them in like water-based lubricant, and then they had them try to get up this set of stairs that were covered in like foam padding, and
I
it was
have
like,
seen that exact video. And
oh
yeah,
man,
that they just you can't do it. Can't
nah,
be done.
it's crabs in a barrel. But probably my favorite, speaking of Japan, my long tail weird sports that I watch on YouTube is sumo wrestling. And this is a great example of the long tail. I was on Reddit one day. I don't even remember what I was reading about. And somebody said, hey, there's this American teacher that lives in Japan and rebroadcasts sumo with American commentary over the top of it. You should check it out. He's got a great channel. It was exactly the long tail. Someone on the internet made a recommendation. If you like this, you might also like this. I checked it out, and it's been like 6 years, and I watch every single match of every tournament.
Just so you're like hardcore super into sumo.
I can tell you all about it.
That's a thing. That's definitely a thing that you can be into.
I hadn't found a reason to talk about it on the podcast yet because it's not that interesting. There was a tournament back in January where like the last ranked guy in the Sanyaku won the tournament, and it hadn't happened in like 100 years, and it was really cool. But other than that, it's mostly just big fat guys crashing into each other.
Fair enough. I know a tiny bit about sumo wrestling just because I saw it's probably on YouTube years ago, but some documentary where like an American powerlifter went and decided he was going to be a sumo wrestler and like broke a bunch of molds. I could be fabricating this from nowhere, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But like traditionally, I guess these guys are just very heavy, and yeah, they have moves and stuff that they do. But this guy went in and would just like pick them up because he was just way stronger than them, and then just hurl them out of the arena. Is this a thing, or am I making this up?
A little bit. It was probably trumped up. There's very much a rock paper scissors kind of thing going on. It's because of the art of sumo has such a great degree of nuance to it that it allows for this equalization that you can't just win because you're strong or fast or fatter than anyone else. You win.
I love that. Can I just say I love that that's the XYZ axis of sumo wrestling: stronger, faster, fatter. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So if you touch the ground with anything other than the soles of your feet, or you go outside of the ring, or your mawashi falls off, or someone pulls your hair, those are like the lose criteria, then you lose. So there's so many different ways and techniques to win. Like there's one guy right now that weighs about as much as me that beats guys 4 times his size just because he's crafty and wily.
Because he's wily.
But other guys just got his number. They just walk up to him, they slap him once, they grab him by the diaper and throw him out.
Well, I mean, I can appreciate a sport, like intellectually at least, without having seen it, that allows somebody that is 4 times smaller than his opponent to win more often than lose. That's cool.
Yeah. So that brings up a question that a common friend of ours used to ask, and that is, what is a sport?
I remember this common friend of ours because he had very clear understandings of what was.
Yes, he had very strong opinions about this. His opinion was run, jump, swim. If it's not one of those things, it's not a sport. So that counts out marble racing, disc golf, maybe sumo wrestling, I guess bouldering, although I don't know if he would agree that that's not a sport. Soapbox racing, I guess Japanese game shows make the cut. That's the only one on my list that makes the cut as a sport.
I've never been big into the argument over, is it a sport or not? Like people will argue, is golf a sport? Honestly, who cares? The word sport exists to facilitate me putting an idea from my head into your head. It's just another thing that we made up, some verbal communication to impart ideas to each other. So if I need to explain to you that there is some kind of competition that requires more than an amateur level of dedication to, I'm going to refer to it as a sport.
Yeah, I like that. It's just some kind of competition that would be pleasurable for people to watch or consume because it's competition.
Well,
that was redundant.
that which is fine. Definitions that define themselves are fantastic. Yeah, sure, we'll go with that.
Okay, so that's my segment for the long tail. So be thinking about maybe what you could talk about in a future episode of some kind of obscure thing that you consume because of the long tail.
It's going to be hard to separate that from the things that I'm consuming because the algorithm knows me better than I know myself. Like for some reason, Hulu and Netflix seem to think that I'm really into British sitcoms, and I hate to admit that they're kind of right.
Yeah, and then there's also the thing where, like, for some reason you just have to do some obscure internet search, and then the internet thinks that that's what you want forevermore.
Man, I don't know. Google, if you're listening, I've already bought that ergonomic chair, okay? I'm not going to buy another ergonomic chair. Stop feeding me these ads.
Yeah, I searched for a class that I could take online about writing, and now every advertisement on YouTube is trying to get me to go to online schools.
I Googled sleep number bed one time, and I swear that was the only YouTube ad I saw for a month.
Yeah.
There's got to be a button. Like my wife even said that when it came.
I already bought this.
Yeah, I've already bought this. Stop wasting your time.
It's coming. It is.
Yeah.
It's already kind of there. Like if you're on Facebook and you're getting pop-up ads like that, you can interact with them. Like you can, there's a little button in the corner. You can click on it and say, I don't want to see this anymore. And they'll ask you why.
Yeah, I've seen those, but who takes the time to click those buttons? I just want to say out loud to the listening device that's in my kitchen, hey, Google, I've already bought this. And I want that context to be understood. Like they should know. They should know. I'm watching YouTube. They know I am. They've got all of my information anyway. Let's put it to better use.
Yeah, sometimes they give you ways on YouTube to interact with it. Like an ad will pop up and it'll give you the thumbs up, thumbs down just for the ad. And I want to say thumbs down, like I hate this thing. It would be, because then it would never show me an ad about that again. It's like not sufficient to interact with it.
I don't want to see any ads ever, Ben. Like, why are you so like concerned about hurting the ad's feelings, dude? Like, seriously, who cares?
It's not that. It's that I know that I can't escape it, and I'd rather have it be for like classes at University of Phoenix and have it be for like laxatives.
Hey, don't knock University of Phoenix. I'm a proud alumnus of University of Phoenix. Okay,
as am I.
Watch. Are we going to take a minute to complain about YouTube? Because the one thing that's really biting me in the butt right now about YouTube is they decided that it's totally fine to have 2 ads at the beginning of every video.
Yeah.
And 1 ad.
I don't know how that happened. I want to call it the adpocalypse. It just feels like overnight it doubled.
Well, it's because they released YouTube Premium and they want you to pay $5 a month to watch YouTube without ads.
It's been a while. YouTube Premium's been out for a while. I'm seriously thinking about it though.
That's the problem. That comment right there is the reason that they're ramping up all of the ads. Their ad revenue has got to be dipping because of YouTube Premium.
It's not just that. It's some of the other features that they're offering, like the ability to have the app stay open in the background on my phone.
I'll not lie. There's a couple times that I've wanted to be able to lock my phone and listen to a YouTube video.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
I don't... We are slowly descending into this dystopia where everything in our life is not owned. It's just rented for $5 a month.
I've resisted it more in software than anywhere else. Like I really don't want to get away from the model where I buy Microsoft Office and install it on my computer. Like I don't want to pay, $20 a year rental for it forever.
Well, so that's the model that software is going, and it really didn't bother me so much because presumably when you're renting it, you'll get the upgraded features and the software will get better, and it's always going to be compatible with whatever you're doing, blah, blah, blah. There's trickle-down ramifications and benefits to you by pursuing it through that model. My problem was there's a couple of game streaming services that have been very popular this year because of the pandemic.
Game streaming services?
Yes. And so like Google Stadia is one. Xbox just released a big one.
Oh, Apple did one where they tried to do that.
Apple did one,
Apple,
right. Yeah. The idea being that there is some super powerful computer in the cloud somewhere that's actually running the game for you, and you can then stream the game, like the output of the game and your inputs to like your phone. And so you'll see like these ads, and there's people on YouTube, you can see them, they do reviews where they're sitting on a bus with their phone plugged into like a custom Xbox controller, and they're playing full up hardcore AAA titles on max settings on their phone. Because it's not on their phone, it's in the cloud somewhere.
They're just streaming some video from the cloud and streaming some input back up to the cloud.
Exactly. And I thought
but the latency's not there for you to...
Not for everybody. You have to be close to one of their data centers, and yeah, they're working on those kinds of problems. But that'll only ever get better, and you know that. The problem that I realized after watching these for a while, thinking like, oh, this is a great service. This could be, like revolutionary and life changing. Then I saw a Reddit post that changed my mind completely 180 degrees. And that is, how long until you can't even buy games anymore and you have to pick a title and you get to rent that title for $5 a month?
Wow. I mean, whatever really... I mean, like, we're paying Disney Plus, we're paying $6 a month and we have access to the entire Disney library. Do you think they're ever going to be like, okay, now you only have access to half the library, and if you want to watch our AAA titles, now you got to pay per...
It'll only ever get more restrictive. It's not going to get cheaper. Like, Amazon,
I
Netflix
believe in the ability of the market to utilize competition to keep things fair. I don't agree with you. I think if one game manufacturer comes out and makes it more expensive, another one will come out and make it less expensive and steal their customers, and it will normalize.
So maybe the problem with saying like, oh, capitalism will fix the problem is that everybody forgets the natural end state of capitalism is one company that controls
monopoly.
Everything. Yes, is monopoly. Like, we have to have artificial stops to prevent capitalism from reaching its logical conclusion. So that's what freaks me out. There's a dystopian nightmare future on Black Mirror. I think they had one where like they had your credits on the screen and you had to pay for the toothpaste that you dispensed and for
let's go back to Wall-E. By and large, it owned everything. They were everything.
So between monopolies and streaming services and advertising and us trying to Amazon. Amazon is in the middle of a class action lawsuit right now because the terms of use for their video services, if you purchase a video on Amazon, like you buy it, this video is mine now. If you actually go through the EULA, like it explains that you're not buying the video. You are buying an extended license with no expiration date to consume that video on their service. So presumably, if they terminate the service, you will no longer have access to that video, and that is specifically in their legal stuff. Yeah. So Amazon can just
I don't see any problem with that.
What? Yes, I see a problem with that. And you know why? Because I, for the longest time, since 2011, have had all my music on Google Play. On my phone, on my computer. This is how I had all of my music. And then I opened my music player this week on my phone. The app on my phone is like, I want to listen to music. And it said, oh, Google Play is going away. You need to transfer all of your music over to YouTube Premium. I'm sorry, what?
YouTube
purchased
Premium?
Or not YouTube, it's YouTube Music, not YouTube Premium. Like they created a new service, and I had to transfer all of my music over to this new service. But this is music.
Happen.
This is music I own.
It's just a trade-off.
No, I own this music bin, and it's in this player, and it's no longer available to me. I own it. I bought it.
I get that, but it's just a trade-off. The alternative is owning DVDs in your house that your children can scratch. But then you got to buy it again anyway.
But you're missing my point. Is like when I buy things, I want to own the thing. I want to have full control over my consumption and how I access that thing. I'm
talking about the economic trade-offs. I mean, it really is a disc in your house that can get lost or broken or scratched or whatever.
But this is a trust. If I am going to outright purchase a product using your platform, you can't just take the access to the platform away from me arbitrarily.
Have you ever tried to send Xbox disc back to Microsoft that scratched and ask them to replace it for free?
This is different because this is apples.
Trade-offs.
No. This is apples and oranges because when I own an Xbox disc, the disc is physically in my custody. I have 100% control of my access to it.
And you're taking on some risks. And I'm saying those risks don't exist when you're buying a license in the cloud. Some of those risks.
So what you're saying then is
you're
that
trading those risks for other risks.
Part of the agreement that I'm making when I purchase digital music through this service that says it'll be around forever is that if they decide to go away, I just lose my investment entirely?
Yes.
I don't want to live in your dystopian, terrible future because then all of my things are digital. And if the company folds, what if I put all my money into Google and then Apple takes over and they're like, oh, Google's closed and all of my stuff goes away.
Underneath my TV are 6 giant wallets full of DVDs and CDs. And every now and then I'll sit down on my couch and think, I'd really like to watch a movie. And I will go on Apple iTunes store and buy the digital copy of it instead of getting out the stupid DVD wallet and trying to find the disc, just so that I don't got to search through the wallets.
We have those wallets and we have the discs, and every once in a while I'll do the same thing, go into the media center and look through the physical media that we have. And what's nice about that is I am always surprised at titles that I already own. Like, oh, I didn't know we had this. Some of them, I will not deny, are still in the cellophane. We bought it and it just sits down there.
Being able to talk to my device and have it just queue up whatever I want instead of having to search for a physical object is so worth the cost to me.
But here's the thing, is we're still new enough and still developing this system where the stuff that you and I purchase is in the custody of a third party. Okay? And yes, there's the risk and the trust and the blah, 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 but we're still it's still a young enough system that we can influence how it is. I would like it to be much more on my end, where when I purchase something and it exists in the cloud, it is still mine. Like, I still own it, as opposed to your version.
What do you want, Josh? Do you want like them to send you a hand-signed copy of a contract that says, even if this company goes out of business, Josh still owns the rights to listen to this music forevermore?
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly what I want. I want them, like, if they fold, I want them to, like, oh, before we close up, here's a zip file of everything you've bought from us.
Okay, you're reminding me of that scene from Back to the Future Part 3, where Marty's standing outside his neighborhood that hasn't been built yet in 1955, and the guy from Western Union shows up, and he says, I have this package from 100 years ago that we're supposed to deliver to you at this time, at this place, in this moment. And we all had what do they call it?
Yeah, it was like, what, just a pool? We had a pool.
Pool, that's the word, pool. We had a bet going in the office that you wouldn't be here, and I lost. The idea was that 100 years later, what business is still going to be in business and have been coherent enough over the intervening years to be able to hold on to a physical belonging for 100 years. I don't remember how many years it was.
Oh, yeah, it was 100 years, but we are not talking about, yeah, in the movie, it was a physical thing.
No, I think it is the same idea. It's this thing belonged to Marty 100 years in the past, and he wanted them to hold it for him until 100 years in the future. That's a big thing you're asking that company to do. It was the contract they made, but they wouldn't necessarily always retain the ability to do that. What if Western Union had gone out of business?
Well, this, again, apples and oranges, because they knew Western Union wasn't going to go out of business because they were from the future. But yeah. What I'm saying is, like, it's flawed right now because of exactly what you're talking about. If I buy and invest all of my media in company A, and company A folds and they don't have a good plan, all of my media presumably can go away, and there's no recompense for me, the consumer.
Yeah, but this is not a new thing, Josh. What if you owned stock in Blockbuster Video?
Man, Ben, let me land my plane, will you?
Okay.
So, like, I want this to be more, like, it's not, I have a trust with this company. There needs to be a completely separate thing that exists in the cloud somewhere, like cryptocurrency or something that exists sans any company. It's just in the world. That is the library of things that I have digitally purchased. Just I have myself, Josh Fleshman, purchased the rights to these digital medias, and it just follows me.
Why do you acquire this kind of peace of mind if you have access to it now?
Because I didn't even think twice about it until freaking Google Play folded this week, and I couldn't play my music.
So now you're feeling digitally insecure in the world of tomorrow.
I'm feeling digitally insecure because I now realize that there is a huge weakness in this house of cards that we're constructing, in that we are putting a lot of trust in these companies that we are purchasing digital goods from with no way of extracting the value if the company goes under.
Okay, so let me one-up you and take it to the next level. Right now, you and I are recording this podcast. As soon as I finish, I'll record my piece and save it up to the cloud, and you record your piece and save it up to the cloud, and then after I spend a few hours editing it, I will save that up to the cloud. And everything you and I have created that belongs to us because we made it is also stored on someone else's computer, and they could go out of business tomorrow and we could lose it forever.
No, we won't, because I also have it on my computer. Dude, I do all the data storage here. Like, I have multiple backups of this podcast, all right?
I know.
You're seriously not crediting me.
I'm just pointing out how, like, you know, my photos, my my videos, my audio that I record, all stuff that doesn't even belong to someone else. Unlike a music where I'm just kind of buying a license to listen to it. I'm not buying license to resell it or anything. This is stuff we made that belongs to us. And it's also on someone else's computer.
Well, yeah, but like this is what I'm saying. Like this is a small problem now, but it's only going to get bigger as more and more of our life is encompassed through digital goods. As software companies go to this pay-as-you-go model, as everything is going to the cloud-based, like temporary license model. So we need to think about this now. Like, how can we make this system robust to protect consumers?
I don't think what you want is the right answer.
Oh, and I'm sure it's not, because I've thought about it for literally the span of this podcast. So, like, this is not the thing that's going to solve everything. This is just the idea that came out of my mouth as I was speaking it.
Well, like you mentioned, you were talking about blockchain. You want some kind of blockchain licensing solution that means only you can access it forevermore. That's great, but it has its own kinds of trade-offs. Like people who invested all their money in cryptocurrency and then die and no one has their password. There is no administrator. There's no one on earth that can unlock it. It's lost forever.
I want a universally recognized, acknowledged, and enforced like licensing scheme for all forms of media, and I want an RFID read-only chip in my palm of my hand.
It's like reciting the magic words to open the Necronomicon. You just shout it out loud, and that the universe has noted that you can now open the Necronomicon.
I want to be able to walk up to... you're killing me. Because this is all resting on a lot of assumptions that I'm making about the computing world in the far future, and this is a rabbit hole that we should not be down right now.
All right, well, let's pull it back out a little bit. All right. So I think it's time.
Let's go from theoretical computer science nonsense to how I was a terrible human being this past weekend.
All right.
Okay. So this is everybody's favorite segment, Bad at Husbanding, because we're both pretty bad at that from time to time.
Yeah.
Okay. This story is about Nicole's cookies. And, in advance, Nicole, I'm sorry. I'm going to tell this story wrong because I'm telling it from my perspective. This is
Alicia hates my retellings of stories.
Yeah, that's the problem when you have spouses that were there when you're doing it. It doesn't matter. This is my perspective. This is how, and it's my podcast.
Why didn't you tell it from my point of view?
Because it's my point of view. Make your own podcast. All right, so there we were. It was probably Thursday or Friday night of last week. And Nicole had, we were rummaging through, the fridge looking for a late night snack after the kids had gone to bed. We're watching TV. We just want something to take care of that sweet tooth, right? And she found a packet of white chocolate chips in the freezer that she keeps for baking. And so we both got a handful of white chocolate chips. And on the back, she noticed as she's putting it away, it's like, oh, there's a recipe on here for macadamia nut cookies.
That sounds yummy.
I was like, okay, whatever. And then she's like, I'm going to put this on the list. And then she proceeds to put it on our shared grocery list on our phone. Like, okay, great. That's wonderful. And then the next day after work, I went to the grocery store. I did our weekly trip to the store out in the world. And on the list was all the ingredients that we needed for white macadamia nut cookies. And so I bought all these things. And then 2 days later, it's the weekend now, and we're sitting at dinner, and my daughter goes, I want cookies. And Nicole goes, yes, I want cookies too. Looking at me, I'm like, okay, I'll make some cookies. And so I got up, and what did I do, Ben?
You picked up all the ingredients that you bought from the white chocolate chips and made the macadamia cookies?
Of course I didn't do that. No, I Googled sugar cookie recipe and just made the quickest, simplest 5-ingredient recipe of cookies that I could possibly find.
Just because there's chocolate chips and nuts in it doesn't mean it's more complicated.
Well, and no, you're killing me, Smalls. No, of course it wasn't more complicated. They're cookies. But the idea here is that it never even I'm usually pretty good at doing these kinds of things and putting stuff together. But this time there was no connection in my brain between the specific extra special shopping that I had done 2 days prior and the request
I'm trying to figure out how
tonight.
This is a husband sin. You've got to have something else.
Well, I just made the simplest cookies I could find. I made sugar cookies.
Okay.
And then as I'm making them, and I'm stirring them in the bowl, and like doling them out. And Nicole goes, "Oh, did you find the macadamia nuts?" And I look up and I stop and I go,
You're like, what macadamia
and I was like,
nuts?
I was like, yeah, they were in the baking aisle. Of course I found them. And then I go back to scooping out the cookies. And she goes, no.
Thank you for that non sequitur moment, my dear.
But then she goes, no, like the cookies in the house. I'm like, or the nuts in the house. I'm like, why do I need to find it? Like, you put them away, didn't you? She goes, yes. I'm like, well, do you know where they are?
You still haven't clued in.
Yes. No, it still has not clicked. And she goes, yeah, I put them away. And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, did you find them? I'm like, yes, I found them. I bought them. I brought them home, and you put them away.
Why are we talking about this?
What are we doing here? And she goes, the nuts for the cookies. And Ben, I literally said, why would I put nuts in these cookies? I'm making sugar cookies. and she like the look on her face. So it was one of those moments, and I know you've had these, where she was weighing, I think this is a Scrubs reference, but she was weighing my good points against my bad points and deciding whether or not the continued effort was worth it.
You thought you were talking about cookies, and she was talking about the future of your marriage.
Well, and then I realized that's kind of when it hit me. Like I did one of those moments where I'm frozen. I look down, I'm like, I'm already completely done making the thing that I was making, and I at no point in this process realized that I am making the wrong thing.
So does that degree of forgetfulness or failure to kind of connect the desire to have that be the next batch of cookies that was made make you a bad husband?
No, but what makes me a bad husband is how I rubbed it in her face for the next 2 days.
Oh, what part did you rub in her face? The fact that she assumed you could read her mind?
No, the part that, hey kids, you like these cookies? Aren't they delicious? These are delicious. Thank you, Daddy, for making these cookies.
You're such a jerk.
You're welcome.
Right, that is bad at husbanding.
And we went out and saw my parents at something, and I brought the cookies, and like, oh, have some of these cookies. Like, oh, these cookies are great. Aren't these cookies delicious? People should appreciate the fact that I made these cookies.
Have you made the macadamia nut cookies since then?
Oh, Ben, of course. I'm here and I'm alive. Of course I made the macadamia nut cookies the next day.
Were they also delicious?
They were also delicious, yes.
Okay.
They did take more effort than the other cookies, but only a trivial amount more. And yes, Nicole, I should have made the macadamia nut cookies the first time. I'm sorry, but I'm just stupid sometimes. I'm sorry.
Good. All right. I think every bad at husbanding segment should end in that phrase.
Like, I'm sorry, please don't murder me?
I'm just stupid sometimes.
Well, that wraps it up.
Yeah. All right, let's talk bad at parenting.
Oh, are we bad at parenting too?
Well, yeah, it's Halloween. It's time to be bad at parenting. So I'll start. The time that I'm bad at parenting every Halloween is that my wife decided early in our very busy life as parents that Halloween was her opportunity to kind of live out some of her fantasies she had as a child. So her having 6 children means that she has 6 customers for her to sew and craft and do awesome things like your family does every Halloween. And I have been the annual party pooper in this endeavor.
Wah, wah.
Debbie Downer. Not because I hate Halloween or I'm against it or anything. My level of desire to participate definitely doesn't extend 6 weeks prior. Like, I'll engage 3 days prior. I'll make sure I have candy in a bowl to put it in, see if I can scrap up a costume and take some kids to a school party.
Yeah, that's probably like the low bar for Halloween parenting.
Alicia starts talking to the kids about costumes. I think it's a year-round discussion, but definitely like 6 months before the conversation's starting to heat up, and 2 months before you got to be locked in.
Oh man, if 2 months before you haven't started working on it, like you're behind the power curve.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the problem is her number of customers is dwindling, so she's putting more and more effort into the remaining customers.
And that the same amount of effort, just in fewer customers.
Right. So, now that we're down to just my 2 youngest that actually want to dress up in costumes my 3 youngest, we'll say, want to dress up in costumes for Halloween, she put 6 kids worth of effort into 3 children.
Yes, and I got a sneak peek of the costumes for this year, and holy crap, people, you need to see these costumes.
Yeah, she sewed silk dresses that almost perfectly matched the stage costumes from Hamilton for 2 of the Schuyler sisters.
Yeah, and they're phenomenal. They're phenomenal to the point that I have requested her to make me a Revolutionary Era War jacket. And she's not taking me seriously on Facebook with that, Ben. I don't think she realizes. Like,
Yeah.
I will pay a decent wage, Alicia, if you're listening.
She doesn't do it for money. She does it for the love of crafting and
well,
sewing.
Then for the love of crafting and sewing, ship me a jacket.
Yeah. and then my other son wanted to be one of the spacemen from that game that's all the rage on the internet right now, Among Us. Have you played it?
I have not played it. I watched enough of it on YouTube to realize that this is the game of the 15 minutes. This is the current Untitled Goose Game.
Yes. Yes.
This will be gone in a month and no one will ever have heard of it again.
Well, one thing this game has that gives it legs is, unlike Untitled Goose Game, that's just kind of a one-trick pony, this has a very interactive human element that makes the replayability very high.
Right, it's kind of one of those murder mystery games.
Yes,
where
it's host a murder party, but transported online.
So the premise, people, is there's like a handful of players, like up to 10 players or something, and they're spacemen, and there's little tiny mini games that they have to do to like maintain.
They're all
the
in
spaceship.
spacesuits, so they all look alike.
And they're they all have different colors, but they all look very similar. And if you're a normal player, you have this list of tasks that you have to complete, which is a bunch of little mini games that are scattered around a map. But a handful of the players are not actual players; they are imposters, and they have the ability to murder the other players. And their job.
And they have a few special abilities that the other players don't have.
Right, and the idea being there that the win state for the non-imposters is to fix the spaceship or the space station, and the win state for the imposters is to eliminate enough of the crew that it is impossible to repair the spaceship
or sabotage the ship. Yeah.
So yeah, and then every once in a while, there's things that you can do to like have a big meeting where you can call all the players into a room and then you discuss. And sometimes, like if you come across a dead body, you can immediately call everybody in the room and everybody can start pointing the fingers, and then everybody can vote, and the person with the most votes gets launched out into space. And so it just turns into this huge,
island.
Yeah, it's this huge point the finger. No, it wasn't me, it was him, like cluster.
Yeah. So he wanted to be one of the characters from that. So she bought him one of those like T-Rex suits that's like just a big plastic bag that you wear that inflates with a little fan that's attached to it. But it's like red and puffy like those spacesuits, and then she's going to put the little like visor on it and backpack on it, and he'll look just like one of those spacemen from that game. So I've got two of the Schuyler sisters and one of the spacemen from About Us, and those are our Halloween costumes this year. What about you?
So, yes. Halloween, for some reason, we have ramped up over the years, like as we had children. My wife made this great collage of different Halloween costumes we've had throughout the years, and I'll probably put that in the show notes. And they've gotten more elaborate. There's more effort being put in every year. And this is definitely a year-round discussion. Like, we're always tabling like ideas for this would be a great Halloween costume. Like, it took a long time for me and Nicole to push through, we should be Bleach characters for Halloween.
Yeah, we talked about this last Halloween.
Yeah, this is not something my kids were into. Like, we had to really sell them on it. I currently on the list, I've been pushing Hollow Knight. I think we should be Hollow Knight characters.
Kids are so schizophrenic sometimes. How can you get them to lock in and last that long and not change their mind?
Oh, because when they try to change their mind, we tell them, no, we've already decided we're going to be this. Remember? Okay. Yes, of course you remember.
Family culture.
The family culture of, no, this was written in stone.
You waved the wand of denial.
Yeah, exactly. No, we are going to be Mandalorians this year. And yes, this year we're going to be Mandalorians. Nicole's been working on the costumes for
You've been sharing the construction process with me all along. They look fantastic.
We finally got like the armor plates like glued on to my costume today, and Ben, I was giddy as a small school child when I saw myself in the mirror with my full Mandalorian armor on. And then Nicole then put the icing on the cake by attaching the half cape to me that she made custom. Like, oh man, yes, this is the way.
So speaking of the Mandalorian, season 2 just came out today.
Don't you dare say a word.
I haven't seen any of it.
I have literally closed my eyes and plugged my ears and hummed to myself whenever those commercials came on TV.
I'm looking forward to watching it.
Yeah, that will be a Bad at Magic episode. We talk about the Mandalorian.
Maybe next time we can talk about Mandalorian season 2.
We can't talk about it next time. They come out 1 week at a time. You're not even in Mandalorian culture.
Yeah, I think it's because I don't know why I'm confused about it. Whatever. I'll watch the first episode then.
It's a super weird thing that no one's ever heard of. They only release one episode of the show a week, and then you've got to wait a whole week before you see the next one. It's crazy.
Well, this is another example of the long tail where we're still trying to figure out what the best distribution model is for online content. Like, should it be more like a traditional TV program where you're kind of string out the interest, or do you want it to be like one of those Netflix where they drop 8 hours worth all at once and everyone talks about it for a week and then it drops out of the public consciousness?
I think that's why they're doing Mandalorian one episode a week, because then you can take this amazing thing, because it's been amazing, and stretch it out over a much longer period of time, which gives it a much larger footprint in the pop culture mindset.
Yeah. Okay, well, my failure to support my family's annual Halloween costume blowout is my bad at parenting. What's yours?
I don't know if this is bad at parenting. I just realized something when my wife rolled her eyes so hard the other day she almost passed out, because it was like the 15th time I've said it. But, so, you know how there's that joke like, oh, when I was a kid, I had to walk to school, and it was in the snow, and uphill both ways. And
Classic.
There were dinosaurs. Yeah, the classic. When the idea being, when you were younger, everything was more difficult.
Right.
I have noticed that I'm doing that to my son constantly. Because
you told him you walked to school barefoot in the snow?
No. We play WoW together as one of the things that we do, right?
World of Warcraft, like we talked about on the last episode.
World of Warcraft, yes. What did I say? Did I say WoW?
You said WoW.
Oh, sorry. World of Warcraft. Whoa. But, so he'll ask me questions constantly, or like, oh, how do I do this? And then he's very interested in the archaeology of World of Warcraft, because this is kind of the first thing that he's really like understanding existed before he was alive. Like, you have a vague sense that your parents have been around, but whatever, they're your parents. But
you're still suffering from the kid thing of thinking your teacher lives at the school.
Right. So
you can't imagine your parents being a child like you.
Yeah. And honestly, it didn't really like fully hit me until I had kids and realized that my parents had a whole life in existence before I existed. It was a very existential moment that almost broke me.
Yeah, frequently my way of experiencing that is realizing that my parents knew a lot of the stuff I was doing as a child that I thought I was getting away with.
I didn't learn that lesson until that moment. Like, everything that you just said was also combined into that my parents were kids at once. Like, blew my mind. Yeah. Not what we're talking about. This is the first thing that my kid is kind of somewhat aware that this has been around longer than him. And so
what is it?
It's World of Warcraft. And like occasionally he'll ask me, well, was it always like this? And I said, no, actually back when the game was hard. And I have said that phrase like so many times that Nicole is starting to call me out on it. Like, okay, old man, we're sick of hearing about it.
Uphill both ways, we get it.
Yeah, because when the game came out in 2004, Ben, it was brutal. Like, it was for real men. Like, in World of Warcraft 2004, men were men, and women were men, and small children smelled like horses.
Well, how have they solved problems where, like, some max-level character just, like, runs up behind you and kills you for no reason?
Exactly. That was a thing that existed on the server that I was on when I was back in the day. And it happened to me so often that when I got to max level, I started doing that. I would go around and just kill everyone on my path.
Gosh, I thought we were against hazing.
That was part of the game. And no, I'm not against hazing. I went to a military academy. I am all about... like passing it on. Like this is character building.
I would do the opposite. I'd run around protecting noobs and be like, you get out of here, you
and then you would get killed. Like I guarantee it doesn't matter. But now in the game, like we are on a PvP server, but you still have to check a box like in a menu. Like you have to say, yes, I agree and consent to being randomly killed by players of the other faction. Which kills the immersion, in my opinion. And back when the game was hard, you just had to be aware and careful for stuff like that.
It's like being able to kill non-player characters. I mean, everyone's fantasized that since they've ever started playing first started playing video games. But if you can kill the shopkeep, then the shop's kind of worthless. And then what do you do?
Back in the day when it was hard, you could kill all of the NPCs in World of Warcraft.
Okay. I realized when I saw what you'd written here that your idea of uphill in the snow both ways doesn't go back far enough.
Okay.
This is somewhere where our age gap really matters. Like video games started in my lifetime, but not in yours.
Whoa. Whoa. Okay. So what is back when it was hard then, from Ben Rich's perspective?
So for me, back when it was hard, we're talking like Pong, Atari games, those kinds of things. But really, when I first started, I mean, and I played all that stuff. Like a classic is probably Pitfall on the Atari. It was where they were starting to realize that just brutal gameplay wasn't fun, but it was brutal gameplay. I mean, you would run and you'd have to jump over these water, and if your toe was just one sprite back, you'd fall and like you couldn't swim, you just died. Or if there was an alligator and you stepped one step too far, he would eat you. Or the snake, you couldn't like touch it even with the toe of your boot.
You're talking about hitboxes and collision detection, which is a whole other thing, but I'll forgive you. Please continue.
Yeah. But back when video games were hard, that's what I think of. But if I was going to make a list, when I really started coming around, it was probably original 8-bit Nintendo, where me and my friends all sat around and played it, and somebody got a new game, and this is well before the internet. Like, I remember the first time someone put Contra in. You're kind of aware of Contra. Everyone's aware of Contra. It's when the Konami code came up.
I owned and played Contra. Don't you school and try to lecture me about Contra, boy. I broke him. He just stopped.
No, I'm just trying to think about how much I want to challenge you on this, because I'm talking about like when Contra was new, not like when somebody pulled it out of a dusty old box from the attic.
I owned the NES cartridge. Contra.
All right, I'm looking it up. You're making me do this.
So I remember when we first got the Nintendo Entertainment System, or my parents did. I was young. I was probably my son's age.
How old were you on February 20th, 1987?
I was 4.
Okay.
I was
all
around.
Right. If you played Contra when you were 4, then I take it all back.
We owned Contra. I don't know if I was 4 when I played it.
Okay, I was 10.
I have. All right, you see. Okay, so yeah, when it first came out, you were more into Contra. I have a very clear memory of the first night we owned the original Nintendo Entertainment System in my house, and one of the games that my dad had purchased with it was Top Gun, back when shovelware was not. Nobody was aware of shovelware. Oh my gosh! It was terrible.
What a crappy game!
But the second level of Top Gun, the video game, is landing on the aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure.
And it was just punishingly difficult.
Yes, it was nearly impossible for a layperson. Like, they made it as difficult as landing on an actual aircraft carrier in a fighter jet.
Yeah, which is not fun.
I remember a room full of adults that were probably inebriated, now that I'm looking back on it, screaming full blast at the old school TV that sat on the floor, like trying to land this F-14 Tomcat in Top Gun NES.
Okay, those are great examples. And I guess a room full of people shouting is kind of fun in its own way, but we've gotten past that where we're just punishing gameplay for no reason. We've just stopped accepting that as an acceptable form of game design.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the game Dark Souls. Are you aware of this? Like, there is an entire genre of video games now that are basically classified as punishingly difficult.
Okay, well, let me give you my favorite from my childhood.
Okay.
By far, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out.
That's a classic, and it was also classically difficult.
Yes, but it was difficult in the way that kind of rewarded. It wasn't just like randomly difficult, like Ninja Gaiden. Ninja Gaiden had like those stupid things where like you would jump across a pit and then an enemy would spawn out of nowhere and knock you while you were flying through the air, and you didn't have any control when you'd fall down the pit and die. And it was just frustrating and stupid. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out had enemies that had patterns that you had to memorize, and they were predictable, and you could memorize them and learn them and build a skill and get good at it. And man, did I love playing that game. I never did defeat Mike Tyson, but I could get all the way to him.
Man, we could reminisce about video game memories forever. Because I remember there's Ninja Gaiden 3 came out for Xbox when I was in college. Okay?
Yeah.
And one of my best friends at the academy had Ninja Gaiden 3. And I will never forget, I was walking down the hall to his room to like see if he wanted to go to dinner at the Chow Hall, when his door flew open and his Xbox controller flew across the hallway in slow motion my vision and shattered against the far wall. And then he came flying out into the hallway and was just looking around for someone to vent his frustration at. Locks eyes with me and goes, "How many effing ninjas are in this building?"
Okay, so if I picked out Ninja Gaiden on the NES as the example of a punishingly difficult game that wasn't fun because of the difficulty, and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out of a game that was punishingly difficult that was fun because of the If we sat our kids down and all they had to play with was an original Nintendo and these two games, do you think they would be able to tell the difference, or would they just not like either of them?
I don't know. It really depends on the kind of kid and what they've been exposed to before. Because now, my kids are used to Mario Party, where you get all these charity stars at the end of the game.
Right.
Where it's like,
right.
You didn't earn any of these stars, kids. I beat you into the ground. I don't know why you're getting extra stars. So, man, I don't know. That's all speculation. And there's a reason that like games that are nowadays games that are punishingly difficult fall into that second category, where you can develop a skill set to be good about it. You enter those near Zen states where you can put the perfect control inputs in and actually beat the game without it feeling like you're cheating.
So are we experiencing the same thing our fathers did when they said this? When they talk about and reminisce about how hard life was when they were a kid, and now our equivalent of doing that is talking about video games are when we were a kid. Is it the same cognitive thing that's happening? You look at your kid, you think you have it easy, but back when I was a kid, I had it harder.
I think it's more that we're experiencing the same problems. The difference is the problems are more solved. Like if our parents are looking back like, man, life was hard when they were kids. I'm like, that's undeniably true. Like life was more difficult because they didn't have the amenities. But the reason life was so difficult and the reason it's less difficult now is because people were like, life sucks right now. Let's make it better. The same thing happens across all genres and all things. Like when we were kids, we were mad about how punishingly difficult these video games were. And as kids that were really dedicated to that idea grew up, they studied video games and like really broke down, okay, why is this fun and why is this one not fun? And then refined it and made it better. This is the fact that you and I can say back when it was hard is a sign that society is evolving and getting better over time.
But isn't Hollow Knight an example of that, where they actually took the good elements of hard gameplay but also made it fun?
That's what I'm saying, is they distilled it. They didn't make it punishingly difficult just because they didn't have any other options or didn't know what they were doing. They recognized it as one of the axes of gameplay or something about a video game people are going to like, and they refined it to extract the fun bits of it.
So what was the fun bit about walking barefoot in the snow?
Oh, that's just a haze. That's just like just talking about how much tougher you are than your offspring. Like that's a flex, honestly.
So you're saying it's not the same thing?
No, those are different. That's just like it's the same thing when I tell my son when we're playing World of Warcraft. When I say back when it was hard, what I'm saying is this game was more difficult. Therefore, I am better at this game than you. And don't you ever forget it, you up and comer.
I thought that until the first time my teenage son beat me at Tetris. And then I felt really bad because I thought I was the king and I would just rule them forever because I had such hard-earned skills. But my skills had perished a little bit and he was fresh and he owned me.
Okay, this is probably a show that you don't watch but you're aware of. American Dad?
Yes. There
was an episode where he's talking about he had his son. And this guy is the ultimate hardcore super machismo American guy.
Barrel-chested American flag-flying, yeah.
CIA agent, yeah. The guy's... it's a hilarious show. But there's the episode they show where his son was starting to get to the point where he could beat his dad at like one or two little things. He's like, I knew this day was coming ever since he was born. And they show that flashback to like, oh, congratulations, it's a boy. And they hand him the infant. And he goes, oh, I know you're coming for me and I'm going to be ready. And like they both squint at each other. like the dad and the newborn.
Well, you described that moment playing a card game against your son when he beat you.
Which card game were we playing?
I don't remember.
That was, I texted you, right?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, Ben.
Hey, we talked about it on the show.
What? Which, did we?
You were talking about some, collectible deck building game that you were playing against Carter, and you were giving him advice, and he wouldn't listen to you, and then he did something you hadn't seen and beat you.
So it was Pokemon.
Okay.
Oh, no, yeah, you're right. It was Keyforge or something. Yeah, we're playing one of those card games.
Keyforge. That was it, Keyforge.
Yeah, but I just realized we were playing another card game probably a couple weeks ago, and I totally pulled a Ben Rich, and I didn't realize it until just this very moment. And I sent you text messages of this. Like we were playing, a listener got us Exploding Kittens as in one of the card games, which is fun. It's a fun game. I like it. The kids love it.
I don't like it.
Listen, it's mechanically very simplistic, and like guys like us, of course, like this is the cheap $7 wine when we're over here drinking the the old stuff. Like I get it, but for the kids and having fun with them, like it's perfect. And my son thought he beat me by doing this clever thing but he didn't realize I had the counter to it in my hand, and I totally pulled a Ben Rich because I could have just let it go and been like,
Right.
"Oh, you did so good, buddy! High five!" But no, I totally
You just slayed him.
windmill slammed the. Nope, I don't think so. You lose, sucker. I totally
nice.
did that.
Well done. I'm glad I had some influence there.
But
it's funny how I defended not hazing, and I don't think of that as hazing. I think of that as parenting.
But really, what it is, it's the our children. They're coming to replace us, and we're just gonna sprint ahead of them for as long as we can.
Maybe. So for bad English today, I'm gonna do just a cutesy little phrase I heard that they used once that I thought was funny. But I'm gonna start off with the American equivalent first. So Back to the Future, since we've already talked about it this episode, made famous the phrase of screen door on a submarine. Although, in the Biff Tannen version, it's screen door on a battleship, so that he sounds like an idiot. But it's the idea of something being useless. Like, you wouldn't have a screen door on a submarine because that would be useless. And one time I heard a British person talking, and they came to a place where they needed an idiom that would fit in that spot, and they didn't say screen door on a submarine. They said, that's like an ashtray and a motorbike.
I love your posh accent.
And that's a pleasant mental image the first time you hear it, and you imagine like some guy on a motorcycle trying to smoke a cigarette and then tap the ashes off in an ashtray.
Yes, that's pretty useless.
I saw another one, another American version that said that's as useless as the G in lasagna.
Who said that? Who?
I don't know.
I
found that one a lot.
It's as useless.
That's as useless as the G in lasagna.
Now I'll tell you, I get it, but that's I don't know, man. There's got to be better idioms than that.
Well, another British version was, that's as useless as a chocolate teapot. And of course, the British make a lot of tea, and if you put hot water inside of a chocolate teapot, it would just melt and make a mess.
You see, that sounds like a British idiom because there's 5 layers that you have to unwrap before you understand it.
Yeah. So if you search this on Google, as useless as ... don't do that. It's because it's mostly just sexual and rude and crude and not useful. So that was about the extent of mine. They started to get tasteless after that.
They started to get tasteless after those 4. Wow.
Okay, I'll give you one of the tasteless ones. That's as useless as Anne Frank's drum set.
Oh, that's just bad.
Right,
Why?
tasteless.
Why? That is tasteless. That is tasteless.
Okay, so and it goes downhill from there.
It quickly descends quickly into madness, apparently.
So for bad English today, that's as useless as an ashtray and a motorbike.
That's as useless as an ashtray on a motorbike. I need to work on my posh British accent. If I'm going to use any of these bad English words, I have to say them properly.
All right. So we did something a little bit different, and we promised several episodes ago that we would review a book, but we gave a month instead of the usual 2 weeks for our listeners to read along if they so chose. So the book that we're going to be reviewing here for our feature on Bad at Magic episode 32 is Superfreakonomics by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner.
So everybody, if you haven't read the book, spoilers warning for Superfreakonomics.
You can't spoil this book. I disagree.
Spoilers for several vignettes that they talk about in the books, and probably spoilers for Star Wars.
There's no plot. It's a self-confessed plotless book. There's no spoilers.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it really showed too. Well, I mean, this is the thing. We're talking about the different levels of spoilers. If you want to go into this book with no opinion about any of the subject matter, you need to stop listening now, because we are going to express our opinions and we're going to discuss them.
But every subject they discuss is something people already have opinions about. Let me make a list. Drinking and driving, child safety seats, prostitution, climate change. These are all things that people already have opinions about. The fun thing about this book is finding out how to question your opinions that you already have.
Okay. And this book did a good job making me question some of my opinions, and a terrible job making me question others.
Okay. Well, let's just take them in the order that they were in the book. So
well, hang on. Whoa. Have you never done a book review? First things first. Like, what do you think? Overall rating, thumbs up, thumbs down, 1 to 10. Give me something.
So when I read this book right when it first came out. It just kind of hit a sweet spot for me of interest in economics, in interesting observations of the world around me, and nonfiction and stuff. And I was waiting for it to come out, read it when it first came out, and enjoyed the heck out of it. The second time I read it, it didn't age particularly well. This time it was like 6 out of 10.
All right. So for me, like reading Freakonomics, the original book, I loved that book, transfixed by it, because they took an economic perspective on a lot of large data sets to extract like some non-intuitive concepts and like put names to it and kind of
things you don't normally think of as being subjects that you would apply economics to.
Exactly. And they explained a lot of really interesting facets of human behavior in that book. And I really, really liked Freakonomics. Superfreakonomics didn't do that as well. Like they had a lot of random like kind of studies and pseudo data sets they would talk about, but they very rarely applied any good like economic theory to it. They didn't extract a lot of good lessons from it. It felt a lot more vignette-y. I don't know. I didn't like this one nearly as much as the first one.
Yeah, so after this, they stopped producing additional books and they started producing a blog and a webcast and a podcast. And I actually listened to the podcast, and you kind of tell that what they decided to make their shtick is the idea of just looking at the world in an unusual way and letting that finding that how that guides you down some interesting path. And so that's kind of more what this is about. It's not a sequel; it's just a follow-up. It's just they think of it as more of the same kind of thinking that was in the first book.
Well, they recognize that with the first book, they might have hit a weird bestseller sweet spot. And then with the second book and any subsequent things that they had to talk about, they were quickly falling into that long tail we were discussing earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it turned into a podcast instead of more books.
Man, podcasts are a great thing that live in the long tail. And it's so nice that there are people out there pushing interesting podcasts out into the world.
Yeah. All right, so the introduction of the book, they're just kind of trying to get to wet your whistle. So they call it Putting the Freak in Economics. And they talk about, they talk about how with the first book, they struggle with the publisher because the publisher wanted them to have a unifying theme. And they said there isn't one. And when they went to write the second book, they're like, you know what, there kind of was. The unifying theme is one of the fundamental laws of economics, which is people respond to incentives.
Yes. And they don't go into that enough, honestly, because they don't ever talk about the negative incentives. Because there's such a thing as negative incentives. Like you can punish people to alter behavior, and you can also incentivize people to alter behavior. And they don't talk a lot about the other side of it.
They kind of do. Like, in that section, they talk about street prostitutes and the negative incentives of that.
I thought that was
the violence and the.
We read different books because I thought that was a glowing recommendation of this is why prostitution is such a great thing that's in our society.
Yeah, I don't know how much detail we'll go into on the prostitution section. But before we skip ahead to that, they talk about the negative incentives of horses. At the turn of the 20th century, before maybe the steam engine had been invented, but still much of the economy was dependent on man's other best friend. There was this huge set of problems that went along with having a horse-based economy.
Yes, and they were talking specifically about the number of horses that were required for what at the time was modern society, and then the urbanization movement where people were moving into big cities and becoming denser and denser population bases. Just the sheer raw tonnage of manure that was starting to pile up.
Yeah, exactly. Or if a horse died, then you just have this giant 800-pound corpse in the street that you have to either let rot or come and saw into pieces so you can haul it away.
You want to talk about a traffic jam? People say sorry, my car died. Sorry, my horse died. There's his corpse rotting in the sun. That's hardcore.
Yeah. Yeah, so the manure, the death, the accidents, the losing a shoe and all the things that you can kind of transmute onto modern automobiles. I mean, modern automobiles die and require repairs and maintenance and replacement and that kind of thing, but it's like better in almost every way.
Well, it's because we can make iterative improvements to a car that you can't make to a horse. It's like, man, these horses just take too much water. Can we make a horse that doesn't need any water? Like, that's not a thing.
And so, when the science and technology developed to the point where we could mass produce automobiles, people were ready to make the transition because the incentives were there.
Yeah. It's like, man, I don't have to deal with all of this. I just want to say the actual swear word, but I can't because we're PG. I don't have to deal with this horse poop anymore. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So then they talked about the horses. They had that story about the problem with the population split in India for a while.
Yeah, that's an interesting issue that still kind of exists today that we don't talk about very much. The gender preference for males amongst Indians.
Well, not just they talk specifically about Indians because they had a lot of research and data in India, but they did kind of acknowledge that in a lot of developing countries there is a strong gender preference for children because males are seen more as being productive workhorses, where they called them like, oh, this is a retirement plan. Having a couple of hardy sons is how I'm going to retire. They're just going to support me.
I didn't get the impression they felt it was because males were more productive. It was because their society is set up in such a way that it's biased towards males, as in males belong to the family and females do not. And so a female's a liability because you not only lose her, but you have to pay to get rid of her. And a male belongs to the family forevermore. And that's completely a construct of the society. Like, there's no reason a female couldn't provide for her elderly parents.
Well, to you and I, in a country that has, opportunities for women to get out into the world and get educated and have jobs and be productive members of society.
Right.
In a lot of developing nations, that's not the same. Like, they don't see women in that way. So that's kind of what I'm referring to.
There is one thing that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about with this that I think is really important, and that is back to the central theme of the books, the people respond to incentives, is that the government recognizes that this is a problem, because what it was causing was families who commit like gender selection homicides, basically.
Pretty bad atrocities were occurring quietly throughout these small rural towns. And
right. Either the worst gender reveal party ever, either quietly kill the baby after it's born or determine its gender before it's born and kill it before it's born. And so then you have this big imbalance in the population between males and females, which is its own kind of problem and causes other problems. So the government recognized this as a problem and tried to do things about it. And it does what governments do, where they try to set up incentives that have unintended consequences. So they thought, well, this exists because of our culture surrounding dowry, so we'll just ban dowries. Well, the government banned dowries and people just ignored it. They said, we'll ban sex-selective abortions. And they tried to do away with like ultrasounds and stuff like that. And then they were having like back alley ultrasounds where people could go and find out the gender of the baby beforehand. Right.
This is the standard thing that governments try to do. It's that grass path problem that you always hear about, where there's
desire path.
There's nice clean sidewalks that go around this garden, but there's this foot trail that goes right through the garden. Because people find it the most convenient way to get from point A to point B.
So the government's trying to put up fences and signs.
The government spends an inordinate amount of resources trying to stop people from using the most efficient path, and that's never going to happen. Yeah, that's just not the way to solve this problem.
So I was at a an IT security conference once, and one of the keynote speakers said something I'll never forget. He said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And I love it because that's exactly what this is an example of. The government has a strategy they're trying to do, and they put it out there, and the culture just eats it for breakfast.
There's just not having it. No chance.
So what the data in the book they found was that what actually reversed the trend of these horrible atrocities that were happening towards missing women in India was the introduction of TV into rural communities.
Yes, because there were so many rural communities in India that had absolutely no TV. But we are advanced enough in technology that they skipped all of the developing functions and went straight from no TV to like direct TV. They have every channel 24/7 all the time from all over the world. And so they were able to like track the differences over time, like when was TV introduced to this village, and then start tracking like the gender roles and the different medical procedures that were happening. And this is something that happens a lot that I don't like these kinds of studies or these kinds of linkages.
I think the science problem here is correlation is not necessarily causation.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to bring up. Like, okay, that's cute that you got these two studies to kind of line up with each other, but is that really what happened?
Right. The fact that TV got introduced in this community means other things were happening as well that could also have been an influence on the outcome.
I mean, yeah, you can infer a lot from that, probably. But like to distill it down to just like, oh, TV stopped sex-selective abortions. Like, really? I think we might be putting the cart before the horse on this one.
The part I do like about this is that the introduction of TV didn't have anything to do with the culture or the public policy or the gender roles. It was just a development of the free world. And I do like the idea that, just being better educated and being more free and having access to modern society improves people's behaviors.
It's so cute that you think that.
Well, the opposite is that they were in these rural communities and the government was trying to pass laws and regulations to govern their behavior and it was having no effect whatsoever. Because that isn't correlation and causation. That is the government outlawed dowries, the government outlawed the ultrasounds, and all of that was still happening in spite of the laws and regulations.
Listen, I'm not laughing because I disagree with what you're saying here, is that the government was completely ineffective in making this change. What I'm laughing at is your like such rosy 1950s, like beautiful sunny day outlook of how TV changed the world for better.
I mean, yeah, okay, if you want to characterize it like that. But I imagine the same thing about like North Korea. They live in just this oppressive dictatorship where people are so isolated from the outside world.
Coincidentally, that is how I would be an evil dictator. I think we talked about a little bit about that on our being evil dictators episode, but.
Yeah, let's do a plug. If you want to hear Josh and Ben talk about the alternate universe where they're evil dictators, you can become a Patreon supporter and have access to 2 unreleased episodes of the Bad at Magic podcast.
Unrelenting information control, North Korea and Soviet Russia style. That's the way you rule with an iron fist.
All right, so that was the intro. Let's go to chapter 1.
How is a street prostitute like a department store Santa?
Yeah.
And that was... So, they it's ridiculous, first of all, that they name their chapter that. Talk forever about street prostitution and then throw in like a casual sentence in the last paragraph of the chapter to actually make their point.
I get it. You can tell there was some marketing that happened after the book was written.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay, the idea there is just, and to my surprise, and probably yours as well, you don't realize that the laws of supply and demand apply so directly to this kind of thing. Like, for instance, there are women, specifically in this case in the south side of Chicago, that are not regularly prostitutes, but at certain times of year when the demand raises and the price goes up, they turn a few tricks to make some extra dough. So, like, I'm aware of supply and demand affecting just everything in the world, which is why I like books by economists. I never thought of like a lot of the ancillary stuff, like how that directly applies to prostitution. Like you mentioned, like the surge for the holidays and the traveling. They talked a lot about the price structures of the different levels of prostitute. Like the street prostitute's going to have to, like they had statistics because they had somebody that embedded with some street gang in Chicago. Samir Venkatesh, who was their intern from the previous book, who just went and embedded himself in the community and somehow got like this utter diplomatic immunity to just interview every pimp and every prostitute and have them turn over their business ledger.
Yeah, and he had like retired prostitutes like following them and tracking like what they did and like the specific acts that they performed,
it's uncanny.
What they collected for it. Like he had some awesome data for how street prostitution actually functioned in Chicago.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is then like taking that amalgamation of data and realizing that like if you're just on the street charging these low numbers, like you have a way, way worse life than if you work like not even a tenth of that and charge 50 times that price. Because he did have that other comparison where they had extensive interviews with some lady from Texas who admitted to being like a $500 an hour call girl.
Yeah. I don't know how scientific all that was, other than the fact that they were examining the different risks that people at the low and high end of the market had to deal with.
Yes. What we took away from this is that if we're going to make our wives walk the streets for extra money, is that we need to have a good pimp in place that's going to keep things going forward.
Yes, that was the takeaway here, is that pimps actually have a positive impact on the risk situation for their prostitutes.
And we can expect an arrest or legal problems with the police one in every, 10,000 acts that are performed?
Yeah, it's really, really low.
Incredibly
probably
low.
Be because they give freebies to the police.
Yes, and that's the incentive part that we should really talk about, is the disparity between the incentives of the high-level police structure and the low-level police structure. Because at the highest levels, the chief of police and the mayor, we need to end prostitution. And at the low levels, the guys that are actually tasked with implementing this on the street are like, I just want to get through my day and go home without getting in a gunfight with pimps.
Right. And throw in a freebie while you're at it, and I'm fine.
That's the thing. It's like, guys, come on, like be lower profile. Stay off of the playgrounds with the kids. Keep me out of trouble, and we'll all just get along.
So they kind of summarized their fascination with this by saying prostitution exists because men want more sex than they can get for free.
They talked a lot about that. Like, so there's a lot of weird. He thought, like, because they were tracking the specific acts and things, they did talk about how married men were paying a premium for things that they could not get elsewhere.
Right. And they didn't go into a terrible amount of detail of what that was if you're worried about reading this book.
They did not go into any detail about that, which was genius from a writing perspective, because I'm certain the things that I were thinking of were much different than the things that you were thinking of.
I wasn't imagining anything.
Okay, so liar.
Okay, I got to tell you a story. So one time when we were living in Italy, back in 2012, my wife and I had gone downtown just for a night out on the town. We lived in this resort town in northern Italy called Desenzano del Garda. It was right on the lake in Italy. And it's not a place where if you were a foreign tourist and you went to Italy, you would go. It's the place where the Italians go when they go on vacation.
I'm going to roll my eyes at you because that just seems like such a hoity-toity thing to say. But please, don't let me interrupt your story.
Okay, so it's on the shore of this lake in northern Italy. It's this beautiful town, with colorfully painted buildings and that kind of stuff. And my wife and I are walking around, and it was after dark, and it's lit up so romantically. I think we'd had some dinner, and we were just walking around enjoying the night in the town. And I glanced to the side down an alley, and took a few steps so that you couldn't see down the alley anymore. I'm like, there was a prostitute down that alley. And my wife judges me, and she looks at me, and she's like, nuh-uh, how could you even know that? You can't just look at a woman and know if she's a prostitute or not.
Okay, so that's something Alicia's obviously not aware of, is that guys have hardcore radar for available women.
Well, okay, but this isn't a male link trait, because she didn't just doubt me. She decided she had to go find out for herself. So I waited there. She went back around the corner and peeked down the alley, and then she turned back to me, and her face kind of blanched and her jaw dropped, and she walked up to me and she goes, "You were totally right."
Did she ask? You still, to this day, you don't know that.
No, it was an Italian lady. She didn't speak Italian.
Do you speak enough Italian to ask if someone's a prostitute?
Quanto costa?
Oh, how much? I'm assuming, like, from my Latin roots, that says, like, how much does it cost?
Yeah.
Outstanding. How many times did you... No, you know what? No, we don't have to go into that.
Yeah, anyway.
Anyway.
That was just a funny experience for us. And They don't call it the world's oldest profession for nothing. It's the kind of thing that when somebody's doing it, there's no doubt in your mind, whether you're a man or a woman, you know what's going on.
So anyway, that was an excellent opening chapter for the book because, I mean, it hooks you. Like, Ben, sex sells. You can't deny it. So having that on the cover just made you buy the book.
Yeah. Okay. So chapter 2, they got into like relative age, which is a fascinating concept.
So this chapter was all over the place with some of the things, just talking about aggregate data and how you can find different inferences. And you're talking about the age.
Yeah,
you're talking
through
about
natural experiments.
Yeah. And you're like what you're talking about with the age thing in soccer players, like that's the cumulative advantage idea. And that's talked about in other books. I think Outliers talks about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Where most professional baseball players were born in a certain
hockey players specifically.
Hockey players specifically in that book. The idea being that most countries where these sports are played at a very competitive level have the same cutoff dates for ages for kids that are playing in youth leagues. And
right. So boys with birthdays in January are a year older than the boys who have a birthday in December.
Which means they're bigger, they're stronger, they're more developed, they have better reflexes.
They get more practice time, they get more attention from the coach.
Exactly. So that's the small cumulative advantage that they build up over time, which makes them naturally more likely to play at professional levels than other people.
Yeah.
One of my favorites in this chapter was they talked about a system, was it a Zixi? That was the name of the system?
Yeah, it was about medical information systems. Basically, a doctor that realized that medical professionals weren't using information to its fullest. They were always busy, but they could be more efficient if they could just get more information faster.
And this guy was a classic example of a problem solver. Like, somebody recognized that he was a smart guy, and they brought him in. They said, hey, we have problems in this department, fix it. And he had interns follow guys around and just literally record what the doctor was doing most of the time. And he discovered that doctors spent a vast majority of their time just trying to get information. And so then he dedicated himself to building a better information getting system. My favorite part of this whole thing is after, like, it took kicking and screaming and so much work to integrate these systems from different departments. And like he just had to tooth and nail this system together.
Right. Fight to get all these people that, like, one guy that sits in the back room in the hospital administration keeps on a spreadsheet on his computer, and fight to get access to that data and make it available to everyone.
Right. My favorite part of the whole thing is he then put it on one computer, he set it in the ER, and he put a sticky note on it. Beta testing, do not touch. And everybody started using it immediately.
They lined up down the hall.
That key point, that was my favorite takeaway from this whole chapter, is just that guy understood the way people's brains worked to such a degree that there is no chance that if you go to a staff meeting like, hey, we've got this great new thing, everybody should be using it starting tomorrow, no one's going to even look at it twice. But if you don't mention a word about it and just put a mystery computer on a desk and say, do not touch, people are going to start tinkering.
Yeah. And so in that chapter, he also talked about how those natural experiments that exist were related to, like, health things or behavioral things that people have that would cause a blip in the population. Like, for instance, communities with heavy concentrations of Muslims that observe Ramadan, which is fasting for a month, basically causes a bit of in vitro malnutrition, which then can be seen throughout the lives of the people that are born who were in utero during the month of Ramadan, or people who were in utero during the flu epidemic of 1918.
Yeah.
And how when they were born, that had impacts on their lives throughout their lives. And so that made me wonder, are there people that are being born right now whose maybe mother was infected with COVID? Is that gonna what are the long-term impacts of that gonna be?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I have no idea what the answer is, but we were already seeing there's a lot of articles that are already talking about the number of divorces that are happening because of the coronavirus pandemic. You get locked in a building with your spouse for a long period of time, and all of a sudden you realize you hate each other. People should just...
Is that really a thing? Like, I'd have to look that up, but are there an increased number of divorces happening right now?
Yeah. like a large increase in divorces that are happening.
I mean, I could see news sources writing stories about like, hey, everyone's locked up together, but is it statistically actually more divorces are happening?
Yes, statistically significant increase in divorces in our country due to coronavirus. Due to the lockdowns in places that there are lockdowns.
Alicia and I are like you and Nicole, and I was very much like you. Like every time my wife would come and walk through the kitchen, I would just look at her and think, this is so much more pleasant than being at the office. Like I never get to see you during the day, and there you are. I love you so much.
Yes, and it's so much better for me and so much worse for her.
I think my wife just likes having me around. She just has to force herself not to like give me chores or interrupt me. I'll just look at her and smile, but keep working.
Sometimes I feel like Nicole has to suppress the urge to like just put me back in my place. Like I feel every once in a while she wants to turn to me and be like, I know you're here all the time, but you need to be quiet. Like just be quieter. I don't know.
So in chapter 3, it's interesting because this book came out in 2007, was it? He says he was talking about emergency rooms, and he says it's possible that some future medical crisis, such as a pandemic, might overtax emergency rooms.
Yeah, and that was like listening to that. That was just the sensible chuckle as I'm listening to it in my headphones, like, oh, like you have no idea.
Yeah, so in that chapter, when he was talking about Azixi, the medical information system you were talking about, he said something that I think about so much. I've thought about this since I first read the book in 2009, and I still think about it today. He talked about how fast the medical information system had to be, not because of the demand of people needing access to information, being able to get back to their patients, but simply because of the way their brains function. He said that after 1 second of clicking on something and then waiting for something to happen, you already start to experience what they call cognitive drift. And that after 10 seconds, you've lost your focus and you're thinking about something else entirely. And I think about that specifically with my government information systems that are very inefficient and slow, and because of all the safety things that are piled on top of it, and how I struggle all day, every day when I'm trying to do a single task. And if I have to click and wait, it's just a fight to keep my brain focused on the task in front of me when it's sitting there not doing anything.
That's a fun study, is how much productivity is lost in the government just due to cognitive drift.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, now that you're in a private sector job and you provide your own technology and you access relatively fast and efficient and modern systems, do you find that you're just able to be more effective?
So then compared to when I was in the military, you mean?
Yes, doing an equivalent task.
So this is actually interesting because, well, first of all, yes, of course, yes. Like it's so much better when stuff just works the way that it's supposed to. First of all, just wonderful. But there is a difference between, because I do work in the office once a week, and the rest of the time, right now, we don't have like a VPN solution. We have a remote desktop solution, which that sounds, people are going to be like, oh, it's technobabble, but it's much more, it's more difficult. It's more network intensive to do a remote desktop. And so it's a little less responsive. And so when I'm at home working on my computer, I notice that you click on things and it takes like a half a second to 1 second longer than if I was sitting at the computer in the office. And I recognize
it taxes you, doesn't it?
It does. Like all day, just the extra 1 second every time I click on something really starts to compile towards the end of the day, where I just...
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. It takes a toll on your mental facilities because it's harder to focus when you're experiencing cognitive drift.
Well, and the difference, though, is then the once a week. Like, it constantly resets. I never get used to it because I go back to my office on Thursdays.
You're like, oh, this is much faster.
And it always, every time I'm like, oh, this is nice. Everything feels so snappy. I can actually get some work done today.
Yeah. Oof. So in classic form of this theory of economics that people respond to incentives, they were talking about how in certain industries like doctors and teachers, where they're starting to try to determine how effective a doctor is by studying data about them, that's causing them to do behaviors that are kind of subverting the intent of the system to rate their effectiveness. Like, for instance, if a doctor is being rated on, like, if he treats a patient and then the patient dies, that reflects negatively on him, then doctors start to cherry pick patients to avoid negative outcomes. And then you can't use those metrics to really tell if a good doctor is good or not. Maybe a doctor that has a lot of patients die is just the doctor that doesn't turn anyone down.
Yeah. They were they talked a lot about what is the best way to really track who's the best doctor. And the one thing that they had come up with was the mandatory shifts that they took in the ER and then tracking long-term the patients that they saw there. Because presumably they're not able to cherry pick any of the patients. They just get whoever shows up. And so out of this huge distributed population, they started figuring out of the patients that they saw, how many of them died in the next month, in the next 6 months, in the next year. And they were trying to figure out who the best doctors were based on just the random people walking in through the door. So that I thought was very interesting because everybody always talks about that. It's like, oh, I'm going to pay the most. I'm going to see the best doctor in the country. And then that really brings into question, well, how are they tracking who's the best doctor in the country?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it feels like no matter what metric you could pick, people are going to find a way to try to subvert it. Like you gave the example of your boss trying to set up an incentive system where she set a goal based on a particular achievement. And you were talking about how important it is to really understand the implications of that, because if you incentivize this particular achievement, is that going to cause the behaviors that you want?
And what's really funny is she floated that idea, didn't implement it, but floated it. And I was very aware for the next week of how I was or was not hitting that specific metric throughout the week. And I told her that. And I'm like, I know you haven't done anything, but just even mentioning that to me has made me really identify these things. Like one example was she was going to base it off of billable time. So we're an accounting office. And so if I'm doing work for a client,
like lawyers,
like this is time that is billable. I bill this to the client versus if I'm doing things that are internal to the company, that's not billable time. And so we had a discussion probably for an hour and a half or 2 hours at one point about just the future of the company and structure and processes, like just real internal stuff that needs to happen. And at the end of it, I pointed out, I'm like, you realize now that this entire conversation that you value was not billable time for me. And so my incentive is not to actually do this at all. Like, I don't want to do any of this. If you implement this system, I want to get back at my desk and work on the client stuff. And so that just kind of driving that point home with her, like, you need to be aware if you're going to base your decisions off of metric A, that is going to incentivize people to maximize metric A.
It's so easy to recognize when something like that's going to be a problem, but it's so much harder to try to propose an alternative.
We had a long discussion about those things, and she wanted better performance. I'm like, what do you want this to be? It's like, well, I want this to incentivize people to do better work. I'm like, well, then that's not a quantitative analysis. You can't pull numbers off of for better work. You just have to assess it.
People respond to incentives, but you can't control how they respond.
Yes, exactly. And so I told her, like, this is going down a rabbit hole, but in this instance, she wanted better quality work. And so I kind of emphasized to her, then it needs to be a qualitative evaluation. You need to sit down, look at what we're doing, and then reward us based on that.
Yeah, otherwise you get broken up dinosaur bones.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, exactly. Ben is referring to something that we talked about in a previous podcast. If you didn't get the inside joke, well, you need to subscribe and listen to more podcast episodes.
All right. I don't really have anything from chapter 4 or 5. I want to skip ahead to chapter 6 where they're talking about seatbelts. Do you mind?
I have no problem talking about seatbelts.
Okay. So in this one, they talk about how hard it is to change people's behaviors, and they pick the subject of seatbelts. So in 1959, the seatbelt was invented, and 15 years later, usage was like 11%. And they gave a little vignette where he got in a car with someone and buckled his seatbelt, and the guy looks over him and says, "What do you think? I'm a bad driver or something?" Like, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and if the strategy was to save lives by having people wear seatbelts, culture was eating it for breakfast.
Which is funny, because if I was the passenger that had buckled my seatbelt and you looked at me and said, "What do you think? I'm a bad driver?" I'd have looked at you with this deadpan face and said, "Yeah."
Yeah. That's why. So you and I had this discussion last week about teenagers. When your teenager wants to go somewhere and says, "What, don't you trust me?" Look at him and say, "Yes, I don't trust you."
Yeah. Your answer was better than mine. It's like, yes, my answer was, "I trust you. I don't trust the rest of the planet." I like your answer a lot better. I'm going to start using it. Of course I don't trust you. You're a teenager. I was a teenager. I made the worst decisions
stuff
ever.
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. She said that, and 2 days later, she crashed our car. She totaled our car texting and driving. Yeah.
Oh,
Teenager.
Ben, that was in the ancient past. Let it go.
Okay. So then they talk about how the government did its usual thing of government, just like you were talking about at work, where you have a desired behavior, which is increased seatbelt usage, and so you apply incentives. So they have negative incentives like tickets and policing and that kind of thing. Then there was public awareness campaigns, kind of like trying to tell you that it's nice to wear seatbelts. And there were beeps and lights inside the car, so that there were government regulations requiring auto manufacturers to put things in cars that remind you to wear your seatbelt. And eventually, and I don't think it was because of any of those things, became this societal acceptance that wearing a seatbelt wasn't insulting someone's driving ability. It was just something you do to be safer in a risky situation.
Yeah. I would argue that the beeping, flashing lights, that was the one that probably got people wearing seatbelts. Because
really?
I would think so. Because everybody hates those things. Like, do
you remember cars back in the 80s and 90s that had those seatbelts that were like anchored to the door or would slide around on their own so you couldn't even choose whether or not to wear the shoulder belt?
I remember when I was a kid and I thought that was just the coolest thing. I thought that was the car of the future. Just like,
that was high tech.
Seatbelt, put it on for me. That's outstanding.
So even though by like the 70s usage was around 11%, by the 80s it rose to 21%. By 1990 it was up to almost half, 49%. By the mid 90s it was up to 61%. In 2009, when this book came out, it was over 80%. So whatever had to happen for the cultural transformation to take place, it's been done, and seatbelts now reduce risk and save as much as 70%, and they only cost like $25 each. So per life saved, it's only like $30,000. It's just a tremendous amount. There are very few devices in existence that save as many lives for as little money as a seatbelt.
Woo! Go seatbelts. Now, were you going to talk about the negative aspects of seatbelts with the car seats now, or were you move on to something else?
After they give all that introduction about how the people respond to incentives, the culture changed. Now we've adopted seatbelts, and they've proven to be a very cost-effective way of saving lives, unless you're a child.
Because these are not designed for you, tiny child thing. These are designed for adults. Yeah, that's right.
So there's this general thought in society that probably comes from the same place that society's accepted seatbelts. Up to 80% of people wear them every day just to save for your life, that car seats also do the exact same thing as seatbelts. Well, if a seatbelt will save an adult, a car seat will save a child.
And the idea there being, and it's an easy sell, because these seatbelts aren't designed for children. Children are tiny, fragile things that are precious to you in your existence. So why shouldn't you go spend a little extra money to get a thing that is specifically engineered to fit into your car to make little Johnny or little Sally that much safer?
Absolutely. Why do you hate children?
Yeah. Why do you hate nuclear surety? Yes, that's the whole thing. Nobody on Earth is ever going to argue against child safety.
Well, not only that, but all the same other incentives like tickets, public awareness campaigns, societal acceptance, all those things.
Yeah, I was told multiple times when my wife was pregnant with our first son that you can go to like the fire station, and they've got all the training on how to properly install a car seat, which blows my mind. Like, car seats are idiot-proof these days. Who's installing them wrong?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't believe their statistics in this book about how many were improperly installed. Cars come with anchors, but I've also had Houdini kids who get out of them, even though they have, childproof buckles and retention straps.
There's no such thing as childproofing. But I love the question that they pose. Is like, are child seats actually any safer? And they went looking and they didn't find any studies. And that's interesting, because the onus there being that, of course, they're safer. They're specifically engineered. So why would you even test that? And then when they
tried to find data where they just took a car and stuck it like a child dummy in the car and crashed it, and then stuck a car seat in the same car and crashed it, and see if the car seat's actually better.
Well, and this is what blew my mind is they had to hunt for one of these crash test centers to actually do it.
Yeah, the crash test centers were refusing to do the test. They didn't want the data to come out.
Yes, they found one center that was willing to do it if the center would remain anonymous in the book. And
they had to sign a waiver or something.
No, when they got there and they wanted to do the test, they told the engineer, this is the test that we have hired you to perform. the engineer on staff at the floor level blew them off completely. Like, there is no way I'm going to put my $10,000.
This is going to break my dummy.
Yeah, it's going to break my dummy.
You have to promise that you're going to pay for my dummy.
They had to sign an agreement that they would pay for the dummy if it broke, because this guy was so on the side of course, car seats are safer. He was going to refuse to do the test, even though his company said that they could do it.
Yeah. All right. So go ahead and spoil it.
So the solution was, drumroll please, there's no difference.
Right.
Blows my mind that
Yeah.
A seatbelt designed for an adult apparently is just as effective as saving a small child in a car accident as a child car seat.
Right. With some caveats, but yes, by and large, yeah.
Yeah. In that, I mean, intuitively, that makes some sense, but there's a whole industry built around child protection, and so of course, it doesn't matter how hard you yell that statistic to people, they're going to blow you off. And I still have booster seats for both my kids in both of our cars, and I'm not going to get rid of them now because I have them. But I don't know. This is one of those things that, why would you? Yeah, I guess the sum total of this and what blew my mind was that it's such an ingrained assumption in our minds that you would never even think to try to test something like this.
Absolutely.
But when they did, we find these answers that are completely unexpected.
There's another one just like that came out that had nothing to do with Freakonomics that I absolutely love. I don't know if you were a kid and you grew up in school participating in the DARE program, Drug Abuse Resistance Education. But there was a very controversial study that came out in the mid-90s that basically showed that the DARE program had, in most cases, no or actually a negative impact on children's drug abuse.
Well, I was in elementary school when I was subjected to DARE to keep kids off drugs. And I didn't know what drugs were until the DARE people came and told me about them.
Yeah. So the idea that is so counterintuitive to people is that it's a well-intentioned education program. Of course it has a positive effect as desired, and no one ever thought to actually check and see if it did or not.
Well, yeah. I don't know. The more I learn about drugs, the more I actually... because of DARE, I just have that in my head. The Mr. Mackey from South Park. Oh, drugs are bad. Okay, but then in Arizona, we're going through the elections coming up next week. We have Prop 208, which is going to legalize marijuana. This is the second or third time it's been on the ballot. There are multiple states in the United States that marijuana is legalized now. And as an adult now, when I do more research and when I read about narcotics and drugs and things, I realize that there's a lot of misinformation that the government has put out in trying to discourage drugs. By all accounts, I don't know if we're going to lose our PG rating for saying something like this, but I've read a lot of firsthand accounts of people that did cocaine, and they just talk about how, yeah, cocaine is awesome. You feel great.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good example of something that they talk about later on in the context of doctors and hand washing. And I'm going to quote the book. Excuse me. In the modern world, we tend to believe that dangerous behaviors are best solved by education. And inherent in that phrase is the assumption that if someone does something dangerous, it's because of a lack of education. If you try drugs, it's because you don't know that they're bad for you.
Right, that's the idea. That's the assumption. Rather.
Yes, and it's a false assumption, and it leads to bad behaviors, because when you start with a false assumption, it's going to cause you to do things that don't make sense, like continuing to fund drug abuse resistance education for children that actually increases children's drug use. Because you've assumed that it's going to have a positive effect, even if it doesn't.
Yeah, if we tell kids things are bad, they always stay away from the things we tell them to stay away from.
Right. And this is terrible in the military. How many dozens of hours do we spend every year doing education of things that we already know? Don't kill yourself. Don't sexually harass people. Don't steal money from the government.
The best. When I was
no one does those things because of lack of education.
When I was in Afghanistan, I remember if I had a nickel for every time that stupid commercial came on TV, don't
AFN.
Yeah, AFN.
The Armed Forces Network.
Don't shake your baby. It's
Never shake a baby. That's a joke in my house.
Yeah, it's who is out here shaking all these babies? That
who's running around shaking all the babies? Why we need a commercial on TV to tell us? Oh, I didn't know that.
But for AFN, it wasn't just a commercial. It was every commercial break had 10 seconds of "Don't shake your baby."
Again, it's because starting with a false assumption, which is someone who shakes the baby is doing so for lack of education, causes you to do dumb things like make those commercials on AFN.
So I'm making fun of the "Don't Shake a Baby" commercial, but I will say this. When I had my son, my first child, and it was 2 a.m, and I had been holding him and trying to rock him for 30 minutes to get him to go back to sleep, I did have the temptation to just shake up, just stop it, go to sleep.
But then you thought of the AFN commercial?
But I thought of the... No, of course not. No, my wife came in, heard the frustration in my voice, and tagged me out like a good spouse. Like, that's how it works.
Yeah. This was such a joke in my house that we used to take the children when they were like 3, toddlers that were laughing and stuff, and we'd grab them and kind of shake them in a playful way that wasn't harmful, and we would say, "Never shake a baby," and we would laugh, and everyone would laugh because we were shaking the baby.
And you get that shaky voice that comes with it, like, ah, yeah. And when they're toddlers, they can hold their head up, and it's fine. They're talking about newborns, right? You don't shake newborns.
Right.
Yeah.
They're talking about the kind that causes concussions, yes.
Oh.
But
yeah, don't shake babies. Like, listen, listeners, don't shake your baby. Just
Are we educating our audience now to do something that they know not to do? Well, it's just child abuse.
Like
everyone knows not to abuse a child.
Yeah, but we need to be clear about this because 5 minutes ago I said cocaine is awesome. I've never tried it, but we said it, so we need to be clear about this.
Well, no. But you're falling in the same fallacy. We're assuming that if we aren't more clear about this, that our audience is going to be confused and try cocaine and shake babies.
Okay, all right, you're absolutely right. Let me rephrase what I just said. Listeners, if you shake your baby, don't blame us.
Right, and put down the cocaine.
If you do cocaine, we take no responsibility for that.
Okay. So there's one other thing. I've got a bunch of notes still, but we've kind of gone a bit long. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about. Is there anything else you want to talk about from the book?
I like the monkeys with the money, but I also like the Mount Pinatubo and the climate change discsion. So which one were you going to talk about?
I think we could probably have a whole climate change discussion on a different episode.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Let's let you close with the monkeys and the money. I want to talk about externalities.
Oh, okay. Well, so the short version of the monkeys with the money is that there were scientists that had a bunch of monkeys, and they taught the monkeys that coins, like they made little fake coins, and they taught the monkeys that these coins had value. They could trade these coins for things that they wanted. And not only, it took a long time to train them to recognize that the coins had inherent value. But when they did, not only did they have a bank robbery, but they also had actual prostitution happening in the monkey community.
Yeah, that was great.
That was fantastic. Love it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all I wanted to say.
So mine that I want to close with is the fact that with anything where you're trying to influence people's behavior by introducing incentives, there's going to be externalities, things that you didn't intend to happen. And most of the time, they're negative externalities, bad things that happen that are against your intent. So they were giving the example of auto theft. What kind of things can you do to prevent auto theft? And they gave the example of the club. If you've never seen the club, because they've kind of fallen out of favor, it was just this giant piece of steel that you would put on your steering wheel, and it locks into place, and you can't drive the car with it on, and it's hard to get off. And you could see it from outside the car. So if a thief came up to your car and saw that you had the club on, he could tell it was going to be a little bit harder to steal your car. The positive thing for you is that your car's less likely to be stolen. The negative thing, the negative externality of the club is now everyone else's cars are slightly more likely to be stolen.
I had the club, and I am perfectly happy with my car being the reduced probability versus them having the increased probability. That is the basis of all security everywhere. You're never going to be completely safe. You just need to be safer than the next guy.
Kind of. It's the outrun your buddy when being chased by a bear theory of it.
100%.
And that's a negative externality of its own. So, we're aware of this. Pollution, it's convenient to pollute, but it kind of makes everything worse.
Yeah,
littering, I have this piece of garbage in my hand and I don't want to have to carry it anymore. Their problem solved, but now the world is worse because of my behavior.
Do you litter, Ben?
No.
Oh, okay, good. Because we wouldn't be able to be friends if you were a litter bug. Because I don't litter at all.
Listening to loud music. It might be pleasurable to listen to loud music, but there's a negative externality.
Yeah, it can affect other people. Like people that have their whole car, then they drive by and like the road vibrates. I always like to yell at them, like, "Thanks for sharing."
So back to the car theft example, their positive externalities are rare, but they do exist. So there's a car anti-theft device called LoJack, and it's that hidden somewhere on your car is a transmitter that can be tracked, and in the event that your car was stolen, police would be able to locate the car and maybe find your chop shop or catch you, the thief, in the act of Grand Theft Auto.
I love the little cat and mouse game that they talked about, because when LoJack first came out and it would get stolen, then the police would go and they would arrest the guys, and most of the time it'd be at a chop shop, so they'd break up the chop shop and get a lot of arrests. And so then thieves started leaving cars in parking lots for like 3 or 4 days to make sure.
Steal it, leave it in a parking lot, and then come back and get it if no one came.
Right, but then cops caught wise to that, and so they would just stake out the car until the thieves would come back and get it, and then they would follow the
and lead them to the chop shop.
And it's just this your move kind of thing that kept going back and forth. I love that.
But they were able to show through data that every additional installation of LoJack has a positive externality on the overall auto theft rate. Like for every one person that installs a LoJack in their car, other people's cars are less likely to be stolen. That's awesome.
Well, because the idea there being that the more LoJack exists in the world, the more car thieves are aware LoJack is in the world, which then you never know which car actually has this anti-theft device that's going to get you busted, and so it's less likely that any cars get stolen.
Right. Now, so I was thinking about what other things have positive externalities. One I could think of is immunizations.
Yeah.
Which I railed against last time, but I'm not against immunization.
You're just against immunizations that aren't protecting you against anything that you could remotely ever catch.
Right, and they are going to hurt me when I get them. So, but like back in the 70s, and 80s, they completely eradicated smallpox, which was crippling and life-threatening, and they just gave immunizations to a targeted portion of the population, and now all of us have the positive externality of never having to worry about contracting smallpox.
Which, I mean, inevitably this leads to the conversation of there are some people that disagree with the science of vaccinations, which I don't know where you land in that spectrum, but listeners, if you're somebody that doesn't think vaccinations are a good thing, I
read this book.
Yeah.
They spend a lot of time talking about the negative effects of disease that happen before the immunizations exist.
Thank you, Ben. You rescued me from trying to find a nice way of saying we don't care about your opinion.
Another thing that has positive externality is getting education. So thank you to our listeners for joining us as we talk about ideas in the world around us and how statistics and thoughtful study of those ideas can lead to finding new ways to look at the world around you and learn new things. And by listening to our podcast and getting educated, you're making the world a better place.